Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Roundup. Before I begin, I just want to let everybody know I will be back at Retro World Expo this August in Hartford, Connecticut, so about 2 months from today, and I'm really excited to be back. I'm going to be on a booth with Steve from RetroTech, where we're going to be recapping and RGB modding a consumer-grade 27-inch Sony Trinitron, and there's also going to be a lot of amazing people there too. Tito's coming back this year. I finally get to meet Clint from Lazy Game Reviews, and I finally get to meet Audie Sorley in person. So a bunch of awesome people, a bunch of awesome stuff. Check out the website. I'll give you more updates as we get closer to the date, but I just wanted to let you all know in advance because hotels book up pretty quick. So I just figured I would shout it out right now. But let's jump in and see what we got going on this week. First up, the GameCube version of the MemCardPro just got a firmware update that allows for cloud backups to Google Drive, with other platforms being added soon. So I think this is a really cool way to back up your MemCardPro and potentially a cool way to trade virtual memory cards with friends. At the moment, they're all sold out, I believe, but hopefully they'll be getting stock at some point soon. And if you don't really know anything about the MemCardPro, especially the GameCube version, definitely check out a video Tito did on it a while back. And if you want all of the details of the new features and everything else that's implemented, check out the post. I basically just copied and pasted everything from the firmware page, but essentially it's the cloud backups. You could access a new menu, and the screen can now be flipped 180 degrees, which is really cool for people that are using the MemCardPro inside the Wii, as that one's going to be plugged in differently, especially if you have it on the vertical stand. So as always, thanks for all of these completely free firmware updates that the community gives us. And the MemCardPro GC was already awesome, but it's very cool to see all of this new stuff getting implemented for us. Next up, I had a chance to do a deep dive review of the new MiSTerAddons 24-bit capable analog I/O board, and I'll skip to the end and say it's awesome, the price point is great, and I definitely recommend it if that's what you need. But I'll give a basic overview, mini review of it here. I did a live stream, but that's actually much slower paced than usual, even because the entire first half was just Voltar and I calibrating my scope to make sure all of my measurements were as precise as possible. And I'm glad we did that, because it proved that this does absolutely perform as advertised, which is always a good thing. I always say if a dev does a really good job, they want you to test it. They want you to show off to the world the work that they put in, and that's apparently what I did here. So let's run through it. First of all, this is an analog I/O board that has a Saturn mini DIN output, just like the Retro Castle cases, which allows you to use composite, S-video, and RGB, as well as if you could make a custom cable or pick up one of those RCA cables, you could get component video out of it as well. I do think a D-sub version that might be offered in the future would be great for component video, or just for people who need VGA output, because it's pretty easy to and cheap to get a D-sub to component video converter cable, or just make your own cable or something like that. However, I do still love the Saturn DIN, and I actually prefer it for my use cases. Not for all, but definitely for how I use it. Also, switching over to S-video and composite video is as easy as simply plugging in whatever cable you're using and then switching the settings in the MiSTerINI file. Or if you know you're going to be constantly switching, you just have multiple MiSTerINI files that you could either boot to by holding a button combination, swap to in the menu, or use Wizzo's remote app to then swap it around. So it's essentially as easy as just plugging the cable in and selecting the corresponding MiSTerINI file with no dip switches needed. Now, the only downside of this, which is not at all a complaint, I just have to let everybody know who uses Extron crosspoints. As a result of this, you can only get a pure C-Sync signal from the C-Sync pin. So using sync on C-Sync Sega Saturn cables, which isn't a big deal if you already have that, except if you're trying to use Extron crosspoints. Retro Gaming Cables currently only sells the sync on Luma BNC version, which you would not be able to use with this then, because you would actually be getting Luma on that line, which is not compatible with the crosspoints. You would have to have a custom cable made, or just get a SCART to BNC adapter. But once again, that is not a complaint or a negative. It's just simply a heads up for Extron crosspoint users. Same with those RCA cables that, so it's Sega Saturn to RCA in the end, but sync is actually composite video. That would be the same. You wouldn't be able to use those with crosspoints. However, every other scenario, you could use both of those. Sadly, I couldn't find anybody that has stock of those Saturn RCA cables. And the last I checked, there were at least 2 versions going around, one of which being a really low quality, probably coming from the notorious clone company. And the one that I reviewed a while back wasn't the end-all be-all Saturn cable, but it was nice to have a mediocre option for a good price, but I just can't find those anyway. Maybe they could be, somebody could find stock or make them. But continuing on, the biggest difference between this board and the previous ones is that it allows for full 24-bit output, which really only matters at the moment on cores like PlayStation 1 and N64, and I don't think that you would notice on any of the other cores. However, the voltage levels and balance on this is far better than most existing I/O boards, except the Retro Castle ones I already did that deep dive on. So do you need to upgrade? Do you have a calibrated BVM that you have just painstakingly gotten everything perfect and you've paid to have it recapped and you've spent a ton of money on it? Then yes, upgrade. If you're not in that scenario, or if you're on the fence, you could always get an external DAC and use direct video from the HDMI output. The only downside to that is you would just lose dual simultaneous output, HDMI and analog video, but you could certainly try it out that way with a decent recommended DAC. Go check out that Kuro's post that we highlighted a while back that shows which one to get. And in fact, one of the good ones that you can get doesn't output audio, but it's like $8. So if you really wanted to see if you could actually see a difference on your displays, you could certainly use that one, and you'd end up with a neat tool in your toolbox if you ever need a DAC. So that should really be your deciding factor for upgrading. Or if you just want, the 24-bit with the integrated S-Video and composite. But I certainly wouldn't obsess about it. And don't forget, it's my job to obsess about it, to then tell you all what my opinion is on the results that I found. So those original I/O boards are fine for almost everybody out there, especially if you're using a consumer grade CRT or not the most perfect PVM. I don't think you would ever really notice a difference. Just don't confuse that when I do my analysis of these things, because we should all be striving for perfection. But yeah, basically, so that's kind of the whole overview there. The other thing to notice is that to let everybody know is that I got this about a week or 2 after they went on sale. I had a friend pick it up for me. And so you're basically guaranteed that what I got was a production version. So what that means is and this is not a positive or a negative. This is just nerd facts. Many times in my long history of making products and testing them, I have gotten pre-production samples from factories that were perfect. And then once the production line started, things started to go downhill a little bit. So I always try when I'm reviewing public products, so stuff that's already available to purchase, I try really hard to get one in the middle of the batch, let's just say, just to make sure that I'm testing what almost everybody else is getting. So the fact that my tests pretty much matched Kuro's exactly meant that his version and my version are the same, so it's incredibly likely that you're going to have equally as high quality of a version. Now, as I always say, any dev that puts a lot of hard work into doing a great job wants you to do these things. So hopefully nobody's interpreting this negatively. I'm basically just proving that this is a high quality board. Sorg's design is absolutely solid. Pork's implementation is also absolutely solid. And, Kuro's work always is, so I'm not worried about that. But I just wanted to mention that as well, just to kind of put that out there. I did post my scope shots here, but Kuro's analysis is a little bit more in depth. So overall, if you want to see the live stream, you're welcome to, but it really is mostly just setup and double checking our work, and really harshly speculating and talking about the circuits and the signals. I think a couple of people walked away from that live stream with the wrong impression. I certainly wasn't saying Mr. I/O boards are bad. We said nothing bad about this one, but I just want to remind everybody, it is absolutely my job to nitpick in these deep dives and then give honest and just more general reviews when I do it like this. So sorry for anybody that may have misunderstood, but to be incredibly clear, all existing Mr. I/O boards that were built properly should be totally fine. Zero chance of damage to anything, unless there's a short on the board or something. But this one's definitely going to be an upgrade in quality, and this one absolutely is very, very good. So who needs this now? It's totally up to you. I still think my favorite case by far, just because it's small and compact and really well built and well priced, is for people who only need HDMI output, is that Retro Castle case. For people that want only HDMI output, but they want something that looks a little bit more like a console, I love the M3 MiSTer, which I'll talk about again later on. And this is really for people who need dual analog and HDMI output, who like the form factor and who want that 24-bit I/O board with the ability to basically output every signal. So I think it's awesome. Definitely recommend it if you fall into that category, and check out the written review and maybe the live stream, but don't say I didn't warn you. I try to respect your time as much as I can, and I certainly wouldn't tell anybody to go sit through that to get exactly what I told you here in less than 10 minutes. So hopefully the post is enough. But yep, links to everything is right there, and have at it, because I think this one's pretty cool. Next up, Marco Retro recently posted his latest entry in his downscaling series, this time focusing on the RetroTink 4K. And while the Tink 4K has a ton of different uses and is definitely my favorite scaler, this really isn't focused on downscaling. So Marco really just suggests if you already own one and you want to try out downscaling, fine, but definitely don't buy one for any downscaling capabilities. And Mike says essentially the same thing. Downscaling is not officially supported. You need to have your custom mode lines set up. Marco provided a bunch of those as well. So at the moment, the RetroTink 4K's focus is absolutely upscaling. I personally use it for downscaling for things like I have a 1080p 24 Blu-ray that I want to downscale to 720p 72 to use on a CRT. Like, I use it for very weird stuff like that. But from the typical, I have a 480p 720p 1080p image and I want to go down to 240p or 480i. At the moment, this isn't something that you would use. The OSSC Pro is still probably the best for that, with the RetroTink 5X also being an absolutely excellent way to do that. And each of those are better or worse depending on your needs and if you already have one. In fact, I know quite a lot of people that have bought a Tink 4K and now repurposed their 5X as their dedicated downscaling unit. So it's very cool to do these deep dives, though, and it's also really great to answer the questions about downscaling, because I really didn't touch upon it at all in my testing and reviews, other than the stuff I just mentioned, simply because I think for this price point, this is for people who are really focused on upscaling. So maybe someday when Mike's bored, he'll fire up a bunch of downscaling focused features for the Tink 4K. But at the moment, if you already own one and you want to know what it could do, or if you're just curious like I am and enjoy Marco's videos, definitely give the video a watch, and you could certainly skim the post as well for some examples. But at the moment, you don't buy the Tink 4K just as a dedicated downscaler. Mean that with love, but as always, you got to be blunt and honest about these things. But if you already own one, definitely watch Marco's video. There might be a couple of things that you could have some fun messing around with. A while back, I talked about a new hardware revision for the original open source scan converter that was compatible with the latest 1.0 and newer firmwares that added some features that couldn't be done on the original hardware version. I also talked about the hardware mod that you need to do that will enable those original OSSCs to have all of these new firmwares. And Reese recently posted a video showing off the new 1.0 features that were first released with it, as well as how to perform that mod. So I really wanted to highlight this because of the section that's coming next, but also I just wanted to reiterate the fact that this is a piece of hardware that Marcus could have very easily years ago said, hey, that was the old product, I'm working on the new product. The old product's totally mature, so this is it. But he hasn't. He's continuing to add some crazy features to it, including ones that wouldn't be possible without the somewhat basic mod. If you're new to soldering, I definitely would not recommend this, but watch Reese's video and kind of decide for yourself. Maybe you'll want to have somebody else do it. Maybe you'll just want to take care of it. But I wanted to highlight both the mod and the fact that how cool is it that you could have bought something years ago that is still getting incredible free software updates. And that's one of the things I want to talk about next. Marcus just released version 1.1 firmware for the original open source scan converter that's compatible with any of the original hardware revisions that has the mod done, or just the latest version 1.8 hardware that is currently being sold. And this adds a bunch of cool stuff that might be really important to you depending on your setup. The first set of features focuses on passing signals to scalers like the Morph that only have HDMI inputs, and this would allow for more control over that and for you to get an overall better experience, better signal. And I just think it's absolutely awesome that a product that you could have bought a long time ago is still working with even newer products and would save you the money from buying the analog bridge if you don't need it. Maybe the OSSC is everything that you need. You just want to go to 4K. So this is perfect and really awesome. Also, there's stuff like a VRR flag for HDMI output. It does not somehow miraculously output variable refresh rate, but very often having that flag turned on will tell your TV to enable it, which makes it more compatible with a lot of these weird retro gaming signals. So that's pretty cool. There is also improved sampling jitter reduction, which makes setting phase less of an issue, and certainly something that would make things a lot more helpful if you're passing it to a 4K scaler, where stuff like out of phase video would be a lot more noticeable the higher resolution you get. And it also has a Lumicode decoder, which is something I'll talk more about next week, because there is a new project coming up that is absolutely awesome. And I can't wait to see more things about it. I can't wait to try it myself. But I'm going to put the Lumicode stuff on hold till next week, because I want to talk a little bit more in depth about that. The only downside is that as this FPGA on the OSSC becomes completely filled, you now have to lose features in order to add the new ones. And the feature Marcus got rid of was the ability to export profiles, which in most cases is not going to be a big deal. So let's say you took the time to dial in all of this custom stuff on your current OSSC. Export the profile now, and now you could have those and use the web app, in fact, to modify those if needed, to tweak them, and you could still import the profiles. So essentially, this just means that after this firmware update, any changes that you make on your OSSC, you're just going to have to write down. I would suggest doing them all through the web app when possible, and then just do things like write down the difference in phase. And if you're the type of person that really doesn't do much changing, it might actually be worth it to figure out the exact phase numbers for everything that you need, go back to the web app, set them there, and then re-import the profiles, knowing that you now have a solid backup. So if you don't change cables or consoles, you could always just import that profile and have everything set perfectly no matter what, which would probably be really helpful for people who change different profile packs all the time. So just wanted to put that out there. I think it's a worthy trade-off and the right decision was made. But if you want an exact list of everything that was added and tweaked, check out the post. If you want to just download the firmware, it's available for free as all of the firmwares that Marcus has done. And it's just, once again, really, really awesome to see this amazing tool still be completely relevant, even though it's years after its release. Just what a very cool shout out to Marcus. That was awesome to see all these cool updates. Next up, I just did an audio-only podcast with Nick from Pandemonium Reviews talking about some of the behind-the-scenes stuff from that amazing Sega Rally documentary. And I will admit, 50% of the reason I did this podcast was just because I wanted to ask Nick a bunch of these questions. But I also wanted to share it with you all, because I imagine there's a bunch of my fellow nerds out there that are just as interested in what went into making a 4-hour and 40-minute documentary that was so good and flowed so quickly that it didn't feel that long. So I wanted to share that with everybody as well. We also talked a little bit about his capture setup and suggestions for where to go next time. I strongly recommend he pick up a RetroRGB so he just doesn't have to worry about anything other than hit the, load your profile and hit the auto button and you're done. So if you want, and if you have the ability to, consider supporting Nick on Patreon, because I want to see these documentaries continue. And respectfully, I think people who aren't creators might not realize the cost that goes into this. Not just the cost related to the time spent. I mean, just the cost on stuff you have to spend. So maybe we can kick up a few more Patreon subs and get Nick a RetroRGB and a good capture card so that the next ones will be even crispier video on screen. Also, Nick recently did a podcast with Dave from the Shiro crew, as well as, I believe, the Sega guys. I'm doing this by memory, so I apologize if I got that wrong, but it should be live at about the same time that this podcast goes live. So I think any creator who's curious about this stuff or any Sega fan might want to listen to both, because mine's not that long. And I mean, let's be honest, you can't get enough Panda, right? Now it's time for this week's Mr. Updates, care of Lou from Lou's Retro Source. As usual, I'm just going to skim through these and give my thoughts where I feel like it, but if you want visual examples and more details, please check out Lou's video. First up, GamesCare just announced that they're making an FPGA recreation of the Sega Neptune, the 32X and Genesis console, using that 3D printed shell that was recently released, which is absolutely awesome. A full reveal is scheduled for June 30th, so I won't be covering it in detail until then, because my guess is as good as yours for all of this stuff. But they're talking about a lot of very amazing features. So I'm going to kind of hold off and do a deep dive once that's, once the June 30th release comes. And I'll also reach out to Fabio from GamesCare and just kind of talk about things directly so I can get you all the info that you need. But that's really cool. The thought of having original cartridges work, and hopefully, because if it's FPGA based, you might even be able to use Master System games via a converter. I don't know. I'm excited for this. I've always wanted something like that. So I'd love to see that. Next up, a recently animated sci-fi films special features section of the Blu-ray shows the Amiga core running on an FPGA. The movie's called Mars Express, and it's just kind of a neat little thing to see Mr. out in the wild and other places. Another remote app for the Mister is now available for download. It's called Rimicon, and it supports a whole bunch of different features, and I believe it's for Android only, if I remember correctly when watching Lou's video. So choices are always great. I've used Wizzo's app constantly with mine just because it makes administration of this stuff so much easier. But if you have an Android device and you want to try this one too, give it a shot and see what happens. It's also open source, and I believe it's also free, so just give it a try and see. Next up, core developer Reiki has released a beta of the arcade game Super Locomotive, a game by Sega where the goal is to guide a train from one location to the other while avoiding obstacles. Mr. Walrus posted the next game in the Mr. Discord challenge, which is Fix-It Felix Jr., based on the arcade game featured in the movie Wreck-It Ralph. The D10 Nano alternative was showed off in a Mr. setup from Retro Castle, showing that it works with the current I/O boards. So that's exciting because that's exactly what I was going to test it out in. The only thing is you need to mod the Retro Castle case, which is actually a modular case, so you would only need to mod one piece of it. And I am 100% positive Ivory from Retro Castle would be willing to make different side plates and probably sell just those on the cheap for anybody who needs them, who wants to use this version or upgrade. So once that becomes available, I'll see if I can get one over to Ivory and have him just add that. But awesome to see it. Also, 2 designs were handed off for 3D modeling for the OLED Mr. handheld, which is really cool. I just can't wait to see a Mr. handheld device, especially with an OLED screen. I think that is so cool. So can't wait to hear more details about that. There's also miscellaneous updates and fixes to the Game Boy core and the 486 core. So if you want more details, please check out Lou's video. And if you're in a position to support, consider signing up for Lou's Patreon, because I know personally I could never keep up with all of this Mr. News without him. And if not, at least subscribe to him on YouTube, because that's completely free and that always helps. Next up, Extrems just released a design for a version 2.0 of the SD to SB2, and Greg from LaserBear is now selling that open source design right on his shop. The biggest difference from this one is it'll fix some streaming issues and decrease the CPU usage when using the SD to SB2, and it also requires the latest version of Swiss in order to run, which is completely free and absolutely an amazing piece of software for the GameCube, so you should be using that anyway. If you want to see details of this in action, you could check out Extrems' video right in the bottom of this post. And should you upgrade from the original, that's really going to be up to you. If your current SD to SB2 setup, essentially a device that interfaces a micro SD card to the bottom of your GameCube. So if you have the ability to boot any kind of homebrew or boot to Swiss, then you're able to access anything you want from this. And if that's already working fine for you for the games that you've purchased, then you probably should just leave well enough alone. But at $7.50, if you have any question about whether this will make a difference or if you want a spare, I think this is a safe buy at that price point. And of course, if you don't have one yet and you were thinking about it, this is definitely the one to buy. So thanks to Extrems for constantly updating this stuff and always having new and weird things integrated into Swiss and to GameCube related stuff. And of course, Greg, thanks to Greg for always keeping up with it and being able to just spin up and sell the latest versions. So links and details to everything are right in the post. Next up, PixelFX have just announced a price drop for the Morph 4K scaler down to $275. That is a $125 price drop off of the original price, and it's even a $75 price drop from the original $350 pre-order price. So that's pretty massive. They also mentioned that early adopters who paid that extra $125 would have the option to purchase the upcoming analog bridge for only $25 as opposed to $100. But those are delayed till probably at least Q3 of this year. They said Q3, but that's actually getting kind of close. So if you're interested, if you are on the fence about the Morph, you might want to think about it now with this extreme price drop. The only thing that I'll say, the only two things that I really want to say is, first and foremost, at this price point, this opens up a 4K HDMI scaler to a much wider range of gamers. So this could be the game changer that they were looking for in order to get more people on board with it. However, I do think that if you pay that price, you should really buy it expecting what you get today, not what you get tomorrow. You could interpret that negatively if you like. I'm sure many people make a game out of doing just that. But I went into very great detail in the post about why that is. I'm not going to get into that here because, to be blunt, every time I mention the Morph, whether it's good or bad, I absolutely get dogpiled with hatred. Lots of accounts that were just created in the last couple of weeks send threats. It's I just don't get it, and if that's how I'm going to be treated, that's how I'm going to end the section on the Morph. I did go into very great detail on my opinions on this and why it could be both a good or very bad thing for the company. I don't understand $125 price drop at all, but I think the bottom line is that this is something that if you wanted the Morph in its current form and price was a factor, now is probably the time to jump on board. All of the resellers that I've linked to also dropped the price. I have affiliate links here, so if anybody wants to buy one through that, cool. If not, that's fine too. And once again, if you care about my opinions, read the post, and if not, just don't waste your time. I mean that with love. Next, Chris from Displaced Gamers just posted his latest episode of his Behind the Code series, this time focusing on Mega Man 3. And I'll read this through in his words because he always does a better job than I could have. But a question that comes up all the time is my copy of Mega Man 3 messed up? There's a graphical glitch above Shadow Man in the stage select screen. A segment of pixels on a single line appear to jitter left and right while the game waits for you to select a boss. Nothing is wrong with the NES or the cartridge. The game was simply released with some extraneous code that causes the glitch to happen. In this latest episode of Behind the Code, Chris takes a look at some of the development history behind the third game, talks a bit about the MM3 mapper chip and how it could generate an interrupt thanks to counting scan lines. Also covers some split-screen scrolling techniques like the one they used there, and analyze the graphical glitches seen in the stage select and pause menu screen, and finally perform a few fixes. So this was just released as I was recording this, or right a couple hours before, so I haven't had a chance to watch the video yet, but all of that sounds very interesting to me, and I can't wait to watch it because these videos are always excellent. Some of them I don't feel like I'm smart enough to truly understand, but I always try, and Chris does a really good job never making the audience feel stupid. I just sometimes don't feel as smart as my friends, which is good. But anyway, definitely give this one a watch. I know I'm looking forward to. Just a quick update to the M3 MiSTer project that I talked about last week. They're now going to be including a free microSD extension kit along with it. So last week I talked about how one of the only complaints I had was that you would have to take the unit completely apart in order to get to the microSD card, and that's just not a thing anymore. You get a free extension with it, which, maybe you're the type of person where you get it set up once and you use FTP for the rest of your time in order to access it, which that's going to be a non-issue for you. Or maybe you're a tinkerer that's constantly going and messing with your micro SD card. So that would be a very big deal for you. So I just wanted to mention that. It's completely free. We'll ship with any of the units. And I just also was getting some feedback that respectfully I think was misunderstood. I had a few people, I heard about a few people canceling their M3 MiSTer orders because they said they heard about Voltar and I talking about how bad the video output was. I think that either we jumbled our words really bad or respectfully, you misheard, because we never said that in that live stream. The video output of this is the same as every other standard MiSTer I/O board that's ever been released up to this new 24-bit one, with the exception of being the custom ones like the Jamix and the Retro Castle. But this is just a standard MiSTer I/O board. So any criticism we had was just what we're supposed to do, deep diving stuff and trying to tweak everything every little bit. But as I said last week, if you want only HDMI out, then this is awesome if you're looking for that console style look. If you're willing to use direct video and only need one output at a time, you can just use one of those cheap DACs and get an awesome video output solution that's on par with even the best one that I just talked about earlier. Or if you want dual output, then it's still totally fine. It's just not as crucial, or it's just not as dialed in like I was talking about before. So if you have a consumer TV, you're probably not going to see a difference. If you have a fully calibrated BVM, sure, either use direct video or use one of the other solutions that are out there, like the new 24-bit board or the Retro Castle dual RAM compatible board, any of that stuff. But I just wanted to put that out there. I'm sorry for any misinterpretation, but I just I want people to treat those live streams as background noise most of the time because they're slow paced. I show all of my work, and I think only people who are doing the same work or should pay close attention, or people, when I get to the conclusions part. So I completely understand if somebody is like half listening while they're working on something else and misunderstood. I'm not mad at you for it, but I absolutely had to address this because we definitely didn't say that. And if it came across that way, or if I misstepped and I fumbled my words and I didn't mean that. So if you want a more in-depth description, just go back to last week's episode where I talk about this, with the only difference now being you get this micro SD extension. So links to everything are right here. And I updated the original mini review in the post. So yeah, just wanted to clear that up. One other awkward clarification before we round out this episode: the developer Infidelity, who does those NES to SNES ports that I absolutely rave about, does not charge at all for those. All of his work is completely free. It's all available on archive.org to download for free and backed up in quite a few different places should that ever go tits up. But he has never, ever, ever charged for anything. The only Patreon setup that he does is very similar to many other people in the scene, including Hotego, that I have always supported, in that, hey, I'm working on a project. If you want to support my work, please support me on Patreon, and that'll help keep it going. And as a little bonus, I'll give Patreon subscribers access to betas that are probably broken. And this does two things. This kind of gives everybody a fun little thank you for your support. People like early access, and even if they don't jump on it, it's nice to know that you're getting a little thank you. But it also reduces the amount of beta testers to make it much easier to interpret all of the bug fixes that need to be done, rather than getting a ton of feedback from people that may be interpreting original glitches that were in the original NES version as a problem with this, to generally more hardcore fans of the game that make it easier to work out. Now, it's totally fine if you don't like that. You are welcome to have your own opinions, but I just want to make it crystal clear that that developer Infidelity is not charging for any of his work, period, end of story. And in fact, the only time they stay beta for more than a week or two is when there's bigger hurdles to get over, thus proving why you need to do all that. So I don't understand why people are so hateful. I mean, is it really that many people never moved out of their mom's garage and never got a real job and just decide that rather than trying to better themselves, they just stay virgins and hate everybody else in the world? I don't know. I don't get it. But I just wanted to make it clear, because I know most people listening are rolling their eyes now like, shut up, Bob. We already know. But In case you hear other people saying otherwise, I want to drive that point across because I don't want this developer to stop doing these. The next game that he's working on is Zelda 2, a game that I have never liked, that my friend Clint has always liked. So we are looking forward to doing a live stream together once it's closer to the final version, and I would be devastated if I didn't get to try this because he had to stop working on these. So please, just be reasonable about this. Nobody's charging for these things. The Patreon is just essentially a tip jar to keep these stuff going. I guess I'll stop rambling about it, but that was one that really touched a nerve, let's just say. So I am very proud to support all of the devs who are working on anything that I'm interested in. I don't care if it's a toenail clipping Patreon or if it's a dev Patreon. If I enjoy that content, I think toenail clippings are gross for the record, but just saying, if I enjoy the content, I want to support it. Nobody's paywalling anything here. So yeah, I don't know. I just had to get that out there. Before I go, I just wanted to shout out Linus Tech Tips and say thank you for featuring me in a funny segment in their video. The video was absolutely awesome. The title of the video was clearly presented in a way to make you want to click on it. It's called 5 Mods Nintendo Wishes Were Illegal, but the content is absolutely spot on. They nailed all of the sections. Whoever wrote it is definitely a fan of retro and keeps up with all of the stuff that we do, because I honestly thought it was a great video and just a great overview of some of the stuff that he talks about. So strongly recommend watching it. He obviously doesn't need my my help with this. It's already got over 1 million views, but I just wanted to shout out, say thank you, and share it because I definitely think it's a fun video that most of us would be interested in. Well, that's it for this time. As always, thanks to everybody who watches, listens, plays nicely in the comments, and especially thank you to anybody who supports in absolutely any way, because it really is you who's keeping all of this stuff going. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week. This week's Roundup is brought to you by Neo Paradigm Entertainment, connecting Southeast Asian influencers with opportunities in the West.